I really messed up this latest race. When I say that, I don't mean that I did really, really badly, but in the grand scheme of the rest of my season and how I expected to race, I think more so than anything, it was a little bit of a disappointment. I think that it was primarily starting a few weeks back, whether it be as far back as Challenge Roth, or a few weeks back when I went to Paris and I got ill off of the back of it, and that set me back a week essentially, I think. Maybe more so than a week, because I was a little bit tight for time in terms of trying to get ready for this race in Czech Republic anyway. And it kind of needed to all go roughly to plan to get it right on the day, especially considering the conditions, which I'll get into later. But I think that for me, because I had basically a whole week off of training and it probably affected my system more than I gave it credit for, I really struggled on the day. The race itself, I had a pretty decent start to the swim and I got into a decent, also I thought, position behind a couple of people. And I thought, perfect, okay, I'll just sit here, it's all good. And then got around a couple of the boys, realized there was a bit of a gap ahead of me who I thought was Nick Canet, who I knew was going to be one of the best swimmers in the field. And I was like, okay, well, I have to try and make a move around this person who's in front of me, make sure that I close that gap. Anyway, I could not close that gap because whoever was swimming in front of me was swimming too quick. But I was holding it and I was like, okay, cool. I'll hold this gap to Nick, who I thought it was Nick. Hold this gap to Nick. It'll be all good as long as he's not getting away from me. It'll be absolutely fine. Anyway, a couple of 100 meters later, someone else came round me and I was like, okay, cool. As long as you keep the gap, I'm golden, because I'm conserving energy on the feet, and yeah, I'll get out of the water and hopefully still in half decent position and I can still be competitive and get to the front of the race relatively quickly. Got out of the water and I was like, okay, all's good, not too stressed here, pretty comfortable, and started making my way onto the bike. I saw Nick coming the other way without his bike. And I was like, what the hell's going on here? Turns out, I think his tire may have popped in transition because it was very hot. And just beware, if you've pumped your tires up fairly high to a high PSI and it's hot and the sun's out, if you're running tubeless, they could pop. Okay, so just make sure that you haven't gone too high with the PSI and you've checked whether they're hooked or hookless, and they're all going to be safe if it gets a little bit hotter throughout the day. I think that may have happened to him because he was bikeless going towards the mechanic's tent, and yeah. Anyway, I was running through transition and there was more people than I thought in front of me, and I was like, what on earth is going on here? I thought I was like third out of the water, but there was someone else that was in between the other person that I was swimming with and Nick. And therefore I was fourth out of the water. I was like, why is there so many people in transition? Like, I thought I was literally a couple of 20 seconds behind Nick. Turns out I was more like 50 seconds, 55 seconds behind Nick. But he had this bike issue in transition. So anyway, first 10K of the bike, made my way to the front of the race. Perfect, that worked out really well for me. Was feeling okay on the bike at this stage, putting down some half decent power, nothing astronomical, probably 360, 365 watts for the first 20 minutes or so, before getting caught by Leo. And he put in an absolute surge to go past me and this other guy who were first and second essentially in the race at that point. So I was at the front of the race. I was happy. I was relatively content with my position at this point. Leo comes past, attacks. I go with him. So all's good at this point still. Go with him, but I quickly realized Leo was far stronger than me on the bike. So I started to suffer pretty quickly, and this compound effect where if you pull soft turns on the front, and 12 meters you're getting a draft, right? If you're pulling soft turns on the front, then they're getting so much benefit and they're able to punch through even harder. It's a bit of a catch-22. And I was starting to really suffer because he was putting in good efforts on the front, going really quick. I was having to basically recover on the front and have him punch through again, because on his wheel I was just struggling. and I was like, what on earth's going on? Every time I looked down on my top tube, absolutely dripping with sweat. So, but one thing that I did really well was hydrate. I hydrated really well, had plenty of fluids, but I could just see like just sweat just like dripping off of me. I was like, okay, interesting. And I've had this before, right? I've had it where in warmer conditions, my engine just revs a bit hot and it limits me in terms of the power that I can produce and the pace that I can produce. So that was kind of playing on my mind as well. The days leading in had also been very hot, and I knew that my system was a bit elevated, probably because of the illness anyway, and I never usually cope well in the heat. So anyway, was chugging along on the bike behind Leo now, and yeah, just cracking on with it. He manages to attack and break me, and I spend the last maybe 30k on my own, and I'd kind of popped at this point actually. Like, I'd gotten too hot, I think, and my system just wasn't able to produce the power that I wanted and needed it to. So I lost a fair bit of time now in the last 30k to Leo coming into T2. I was still ahead of Andreas Dreitz, who was another minute back behind me getting onto the run. So like, I mean, all in all, second into transition, not a bad place to be in the slightest. I was really pleased with that. So I could see that people were miles behind me in a couple of the U-turns. So I knew that I was in still a half decent position, hoping that I had legs on the run to be able to put myself into podium contention. That was not the case. Got onto the run, literally jogging around. And I've been in this position before last year in Marbella and Chamorin, and I literally felt as though I was jogging around and could not go any faster, just stuck in second gear and yeah, unable to push hard. And I'm almost positive that my engine was just too hot, could not produce any pace or power, and I'd just overcooked myself, overridden essentially, and just could not bring myself back down to a half decent heart rate and therefore pace. So whilst I came into transition second, I was very quickly overtaken by another, I don't know, I think I came 9th in the end, so another 7-8 people before the end of the race. I could not get going. It started getting a little bit cooler towards the end of the run. The cloud cover came over and I started being able to run a little bit better. But before that, literally jogging around, doesn't matter if I put ice, water, anything over me, it was not working. 9th, you may say, isn't a terrible result in a pro field, in a pro race. But I think that because I was half hoping, like, not to discredit any of the pros, I was half hoping to get a podium in this race. It wasn't the highest strength of field score that I've been in this year by any stretch. So I was kind of hoping to put my name in the mix for a podium potential. And to be quite far off of that was quite disheartening for one reason or another, whether it was the illness and the setback or whether it was just not being able to cope in the heat and the days leading in with the heat as well. Either way, very disheartening, very disappointing. And you can't help but be like, oh, is it even worth carrying on the season? I was so far off the mark, so far off where I wanted to be, where I thought I was, and just question that, because at the end of the day, you don't want to be that far off where you thought you were. And you don't want to turn up to another race and have that situation happen again. So obviously, got back to the UK and I've gotten my head down again, starting to build back in to the block in preparation for Almere, which is going to be hot again. So I'm going to have to do something about it. Please do, if you have any tips, comment below for some heat prep and acclimatization. I think my coach Luke is going to have something to add to that as well. But yeah, if you do have any ideas, please pop them down below. In terms of this heat scenario that I've got going on and that kind of like engine overheating, there's a couple of things that aren't working in my favor and why I suffer with the heat so much, I think. And primarily it's because I produce a lot of power for a small person. I produce a lot of power. I don't have a lot of surface area because I'm quite short and stocky. My muscle mass also kind of insulates and keeps a lot of heat in. But it means that, like, obviously the more power that you're producing, the more energy that you're like kind of exerting, and therefore the more heat you're expelling. And if you can't dissipate that heat because you haven't got a high surface area to sweat out and then evaporate, then you're basically just unable to get rid of that heat. So it kind of just sticks on the body, heats the engine up, just like a car would if you don't have sufficient cooling or a big enough radiator or air vents or whatever. And essentially you just overheat, and then you have to reduce the power to stay cool and allow the engine to be functioning in that kind of safety zone. And there is that. Then there's the fact that I've got a ridiculously high sweat rate and that I need to consume so much liquid fluid to stay cool as well. That was fine on the day. I think it was more so this kind of power production, heat production, and the inability to dissipate that heat. So I don't really know what the solution is within a race, other than kind of trying to just get heat acclimatized and make sure that the body's used to it, with things like hot baths after training, hot showers, sauna sessions, training in heat. Ideally, I just go abroad and just train on training camps in the heat and get used to it that way. I had a good training camp in Lanzarote to do that, and I felt really good off of the back of that. Came into Valencia and actually had a really good race, even though it was fairly warm. But yeah, I don't know what the solution is short term for Almere, other than maybe hot baths and saunas. But yeah, again, if you do have any solutions or advice, please pop them in the comments below. Thanks for watching. Hopefully this wasn't too kind of disheartening or unenthusiastic, but at the end of the day, dusted myself off, gotten over the fact that I didn't have the race that I wanted, and I'm on track to hopefully do really well in the next few races to close out my season. It's going to be a bloody tough couple of races to finish off the back end of the season though. Almere full distance and then Barcelona full distance 3 weeks later, so don't have a ton of time in between, and maybe that's been one of the causes as well of not performing the way I want to the back end of the season. Too much racing at the end of and not enough training. I'll have to review it at the end of the season and get back to you, because at the end of the day, it needs to be reflected on. It needs to make sure that I'm doing enough training to sustain for the whole season. I can't say that I have or I haven't off of one bad race or one not so good race. So yeah, I think that I'll see how these next couple of races go. And if they go all right, then yeah, maybe I've balanced it correctly or just gotten away with it. And if not, then I'll have to review it for next season. But thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.